Hello, everyone, and welcome to Digital Journeys. Today, we are going to continue our discussion on the importance of system integration in part three of this series. We pick up where we left off with Jim Holman and Jon Schrader.
Thanks for joining me today, John. Question, John, that comes up, and you had mentioned security. So what security measures need to be considered to ensure that data is protected during the integration?
Yeah, a foundational measure of information security is protecting data in flight and data at rest. So this means that any information transferring out of or into any other system needs to be encrypted. It needs to be encrypted during transit and stored securely once it's in any other system. And so information security or data protection is ultimately critical in system integration, especially if you're doing a system integration, not just internally between internal systems, but data integration with your partners or with your customers, so external integration. So things like user access control and logging are critical to know what, or like change audit logs. So what changed, who changed it, and when did it change? Those are important to track back, what are things that have changed. But, really the key is to make sure that there is a high level of encryption and the data is secure in between the systems. And you typically do not want to store data in the integration platform. So, the data needs to be just in transit between the systems and not stored anywhere, especially, critical data like, PII or HIPAA related information. So, got to make sure that the data does not get stored in the transmission, just in the destination source.
Right. Thanks, John. That's it's pretty clear that you need to have an idea on how you want to protect your data. Can you talk a little about potential risks involved and how those risks might be mitigated?
Yeah, I think typically integrations in the past have been, again at the database layer, maybe batch processed. So I really do feel like there needs to be a paradigm shift in the new modern API era in going away from batch processing to what I'll call single piece flow, or what Lean Six Sigma calls single piece flow. So this means that really you want to integrate in real time between systems, for that specific atomic transaction, meaning that a sales order came into your e-commerce platform. You want to integrate to your, inventory and fulfillment system, typically your ERP platform. You want to integrate for that specific transaction and that specific transaction, only. So you're not batching them up in your e-commerce platform and then sending them over to your ERP in one big burst. Really, what that does is it really does reduce the problems that you have between those two platforms. So sometimes what may happen is if you process in batch and an error occurs in the middle of that batch, it may hold hostage the other transactions that come after that. And so you want to make sure that, those other transactions get processed or not delayed or held hostage by that one error. And so typically we want to move away from, database batch processing thinking to more single piece flow, individual transaction, atomic transaction integration. And so, the API era is really ushering in that sort of paradigm shift and that thinking. So I think the good news is it's near real time, so it reduces unexpected, delay and complexities in the integration. And there's kind of a mapping. You're only really thinking about that transaction and then repeating that many, many times. So it really, I think, is the paradigm shift that we need to preach. That makes sense.
Right. Yeah, so having the paradigm shift needs to keep up with the technology, with the tools. Batch processing, the days of, say, old school database point to point, used with a tool that doesn't require that, there's probably a rethink there where you need to modernize your approach on how you would do an integration as your tools get better.
Yeah. And the nice thing about the API layer is the business logic stays within those systems that own the data. You're not trying to build too much business logic in the integration itself between the systems. Any rules or business rules around that data or cross-checking or data integrity is maintained within that system when integrating through the API layer.
So Jon, what type of timelines are typical for completing integrations? I know that's a very broad question, but what kind of resources also are needed by an organization that wants to complete an integration?
Yeah, good question, Jim. Integration, it does really depend on, what type of integration that we're doing. And it depends on the tools and approach that we're using in process too. So obviously using an integration platform as a service can speed up the integration process because of those things that I mentioned earlier is, hey, there may be an out-of-the-box connector to that data source or that API. There may be, mapping that just needs to be done and can be done really, really quickly. So it does depend on kind of the tools, and it depends on what type of integration. Is it deep integration, meaning multiple services? It could be, just customers, just contacts, or is it, sales orders and items and units of measure and, all the different things that could go into an integration. But, typical integration project may be, 3 weeks to 3 months, depending on the complexity. But, typically you want to identify a specific system of record as the source of truth and have that source of truth then, send its data out to other systems that may need it. But you've got to identify kind of a source of truth between the different systems.
Right. And then as the platforms become less technical, do you find that from a resourcing perspective, it's less, say, developer dependent?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said before, kind of no code, low code type integrations can go faster, and the learning curve is a lot less. So, and then depending on, a specific skill set to do an integration, it may take a while to find that specific person that knows what they're doing in that type of integration. So, iPaaS tools, more industry practice, system integration tool sets are really reducing the complexity of integration as well as the timelines of an integration project.
That's great. And we talked a little earlier about some needs for integrations that require an integration come up and to be moved into production really quickly. So having something that's less technical and potentially more integration developers within an organization can be helpful. Can you, for one last question, Jon, before we go, one thing that's been on my mind as well as other clients that are interested in an integration, they don't have really an integration posture. How can the success of an integration be measured, and what metrics should be considered?
Yeah, Jim, you can help me answer this one too, but typically on projects that we start off with a customer or client, you always want to start with what is the ROI, what is the potential return on investment, and having a shared business case with the client, putting a shared business case together for that integration project. And I think it really becomes a critical mass when you have 3, 4, 5 different systems that you need to integrate. You have to then hit a critical mass to really invest in like a integration platform as a service or something. But it's better to start when you're smaller and then build upon it. But really go through an ROI model on what that looks like, for current costs and what it might look like for an automated system.
Right. The areas where we see clients tend to have the best opportunities for an ROI tends to be in cost reduction. So here, if they have, for example, some integration platforms can replace a legacy integration that the client may be paying for support on. They may have to retain the original developer because it's proprietary. And by moving to, say, a commercial off-the-shelf tool, they can reduce what they're spending on current integrations. And what we see having such a large CPA practice as part of Cherry Bekaert is in some very messy audits, either because an integration that exists isn't working well, or there is no integration. And there's such a manual amount of data entry, which tends to be then pushed to the end of the period or the month, because entering data by hand is a pain, which means errors come up, there's deadlines, there's additional managerial review and approval that otherwise wouldn't be needed. So there's a lot of cost avoidance by having your people that are currently not using an integration to do something of higher value.
Yeah, and we like to focus on reducing risk or reducing costs, but there is the other side of the equation, which is increasing revenue or increasing, profit, because we can really run a process faster or scale without increasing the cost side of the equation. So integration really becomes an enabler to scale and grow and increase revenue. And so I think that's really where automation and system integration can help businesses in their growth strategy. Or maybe going into a different market. So maybe you have your own e-commerce platform, but now you want to sell in Amazon, marketplace, or Walmart, or eBay, things like that. So how do you integrate to those systems to increase your market share and increase your market presence? So system integration can be an enabler and can be a growth engine as well. So it's not just about reducing costs or streamlining that process. It could be increasing revenue or going after additional markets.
Thanks, Jon. So we want to thank Jon Schrader for joining me today to talk about systems integrations. It's been a very lively and interesting discussion with a lot of downstream benefits to customers out there in really any size, from the enterprise down to startups into the mid-market. So Jon, thanks again for joining me. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks, Jim, for having me, and great time to spend with you.
Thanks, Jon. So if you'd like to learn more about systems integrations and how this might be able to benefit your organization, please contact us.
Thank you, Jim and Jon, for the discussion today. If you enjoyed this discussion on system integration, please feel free to like and share on your favorite social media channels. Stay tuned for the next episode of Digital Journeys.